The novel 12 O'Clock High was more than just an exciting war story. It was a deeply personal endeavor for its co-authors, Bernard Lay Jr. and Cy Bartlett. Both men had served as officers in the 8th Air Force during World War II, experiencing firsthand the brutal reality of aerial combat over Europe. Their novel was not simply a work of fiction, but a reflection of their own struggles, triumphs, and the immense psychological toll that warfare inflicted on those who endured it. The book drew inspiration from the 306th Bombardment Group, one of the first American units to engage in the fierce battle for air supremacy against Nazi Germany. Its raw realism and intense emotional depth came directly from the lived experiences of Lay and Bartlett, who aimed to provide an unfiltered account of aerial warfare to a wider audience. Despite the eventual success of 12 O'Clock High, the project almost never happened. When the war ended, Bartlett envisioned turning their experiences into a novel that would not only serve as a compelling story, but also as a historical record of the challenges faced by the men who fought in the skies. He believed that the world needed to understand what bomber crews had endured, and a novel could serve as both a remembrance and a testament to their sacrifices. Lay, a former bomb group commander and skilled writer, was initially hesitant. The thought of revisiting such a painful and emotionally charged period of his life was overwhelming. After witnessing so much destruction and loss, he questioned whether people still had an appetite for war stories. The world, he believed, was eager to move on. But Bartlett remained persistent, convinced that their story needed to be told. His determination eventually won Lay over, and together they embarked on the difficult task of translating their war experiences into a powerful narrative. Lay's writing conditions were far from ideal. He lived in a cramped Los Angeles apartment with relatives, a setting hardly suited for the intense creative process required to write a novel. To carve out a space for himself, he repurposed the building's basement, fashioning a rudimentary workspace with an orange crate serving as a desk, dimly lit by a single light bulb. Despite these less-than-optimal conditions, he threw himself into the project, drawing upon his memories and observations to construct a story that was both authentic and emotionally gripping. For 15 months, he and Bartlett painstakingly developed the character of Brigadier General Frank Savage, a relentless leader who pushed his men to greatness in combat but ultimately succumbed to the crushing weight of command. Savage was a composite character, embodying the traits of several real-life bomber commanders, but his struggles were all too real. During the day, Bartlett worked as a writer and producer at 20th Century Fox, but each evening he and Lay would convene to refine their manuscript, ensuring that every detail remained true to reality. They labored over dialogue, character development, and the emotional weight of the narrative, determined to create something that would not only entertain, but also educate and honor those who had fought. The novel's title, 12 O'Clock High, was inspired by the terminology used by bomber crews when spotting enemy aircraft approaching from above. Bartlett's wife, actress Ellen Drew, happened to overhear their discussion about German fighter tactics and remarked, "There's your title." The phrase captured both the intensity of combat and the relentless threat of enemy attacks. Upon completion, the manuscript was published by Harper & Brothers in 1948. Almost immediately, it was praised for its realism, intensity, and emotional depth, securing its place as one of the most significant war novels of its time. The story was deeply tied to the real-life experiences of the 306th Bombardment Group, famously nicknamed the Wreckers. Stationed in Thurley, England, The unit played a crucial role in America's air war against Germany, conducting high-risk bombing raids from October 1942 to April 1945. The early days of their campaign were particularly brutal, with casualty rates reaching nearly 10% per mission. Many airmen never survived long enough to complete the required 25-mission tour before being shot down. The physical and psychological toll was immense, pushing the men to their absolute limits. Leading the 306th during its initial operations was Colonel Charles "Chip" Overacker, a well-meaning officer whose deep emotional connection to his men became both a strength and a liability. His leadership style was paternal rather than authoritative. He cared deeply for his crews, but struggled with the brutal decision-making required in combat. Sending men on missions he knew might be their last took a heavy toll on him. Recognizing the need for a firmer hand to navigate the challenges of high-stakes warfare, Brigadier General Ira Eaker made the difficult decision to replace Overacker with Colonel Frank Armstrong. An experienced and disciplined commander, Armstrong was known for his unyielding standards and tactical acumen. Armstrong's arrival marked a turning point for the 306th. He wasted no time reshaping the unit's culture, instilling a sense of discipline and focus that had previously been lacking. His commanding presence and battlefield expertise made an immediate impact. He was both respected and feared, believing in pushing his crews to their absolute limits. Only through rigorous training and strict discipline, he argued, could they survive the deadly missions ahead. Donald Bevan, a waist gunner in the 306th, later described Armstrong as a man who could have stepped straight out of a Hollywood war film, charismatic, imposing, and always impeccably dressed. Though the unit had already been filled with skilled pilots and gunners, Armstrong's leadership elevated them to a new level, making them one of the most formidable bomber groups of the war. One of the most striking aspects of 12 O'Clock High was its unflinching portrayal of the psychological toll of combat. While many war stories focused on action and heroics, Leigh and Bartlett chose to explore the emotional and mental struggles of those who lived through it. The novel's depiction of Brigadier General Savage's breakdown mirrored the real experiences of countless airmen who found themselves crushed under the weight of constant danger and devastating losses. The 8th Air Force had pioneered strategic daylight bombing, but they also ventured into uncharted territory regarding the emotional toll such operations took on their crews. Many suffered from extreme exhaustion, combat fatigue, and emotional collapse. Veteran airman Harry Crosby recalled how some flyers, after enduring too many close calls, witnessing mid-air explosions, or losing comrades in horrific ways, simply reached their breaking point. The military came to understand that these men were not cowards, but victims of extreme stress, classifying them as combat failures. This raw and deeply human aspect of war made 12 O'Clock High so powerful. The novel and its film adaptation were not just about daring missions, strategic brilliance, or battlefield victories. They delved into the cost of leadership, the burden of command, and the fragile line between resilience and collapse. The work of Leigh and Bartlett remains a timeless study of wartime psychology, capturing both the grandeur and tragedy of aerial combat in World War II. Its influence went beyond literature and film, shaping military training programs and leadership studies, cementing its legacy as one of the most profound war stories ever told. The character of General Frank Savage was inspired by Colonel Frank Armstrong. However, many people were unaware that the depiction of Savage's psychological breakdown was entirely fictional. Armstrong himself found this misconception both amusing and frustrating. Over the years, Those unfamiliar with his service assumed he had suffered a real emotional collapse. People would approach him with genuine concern, asking, "How long did it take you to recover?" Armstrong could only laugh and shake his head, explaining that while the film's themes of stress and leadership under pressure were realistic, the personal breakdown attributed to his character was pure invention. The men who had actually served with him never let him forget it, turning it into an inside joke. They would often tease him, saying, "Too bad you never quite got over your mental problem." This fictional breakdown became so widely accepted that Armstrong had to repeatedly clarify the truth, though the story had already taken on a life of its own. As the novel took shape, Bernley Jr. and Cy Bartlett saw its potential as a gripping film adaptation. They believed that bringing 12 O'Clock High to the screen could create a war story unlike any before. In 1948, 20th Century Fox took a bold gamble, acquiring the rights for $100,000, a significant sum at the time. Studio head Darryl F. Zanuck, known for his bold and unconventional approach to filmmaking, recognized that an air combat movie needed both visual spectacle and a deeply human story. However, he also understood the financial risk. Just a few years after World War II, audiences were shifting their interest to post-war dramas, romances, and adventure films, making war stories less of a guaranteed box office success. To achieve realism and scale, the studio required extensive support from the U.S. Air Force. Rather than navigating bureaucratic channels, Zanuck wrote directly to General Hoyt S. Vandenberg, the Air Force Chief of Staff. His letter was both persuasive and passionate, outlining his vision for a film that would honor the bravery and sacrifice of airmen while exploring the burden of leadership in combat. Vandenberg, recognizing the film's potential, agreed to support the production. He assigned Colonel John DeRussy, an experienced operations officer from General Curtis LeMay's 305 Bombardment Group, as the film's technical advisor. Pulled from his teaching position at the Air Command and Staff School, DeRussy took on a 90-day assignment to ensure the film's accuracy in depicting tactics, procedures, and the culture of the 8th Air Force. One of the biggest challenges was securing authentic aircraft for the aerial combat sequences. The Air Force provided 12 B-17 Flying Fortresses, legendary bombers that had dominated European skies during the war. However, many of these planes had been repurposed as drone targets or even exposed to atomic bomb tests, resulting in radiation contamination. Because of this, the Air Force imposed strict flight restrictions, making it essential to plan each aerial sequence with precision. Despite the risks, the production team was determined to capture breathtaking and realistic dogfight scenes. Zanuck brought in Henry King, a seasoned director known for historical and war dramas. King understood the weight of the story and insisted on an uncompromising level of authenticity. Leigh and Bartlett continued refining the script, emphasizing the psychological strain of command and the high-stakes decisions that shaped the war effort. The emotional core of the film centered on Savage's gradual mental collapse, a moment that would resonate deeply with audiences. To find the perfect filming locations, King personally scouted sites, flying over 16,000 miles in his Beechcraft aircraft. With DeRussy's guidance, he explored multiple military bases before selecting Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Within its vast 500,000-acre expanse, he discovered an ideal setting at Duke Field, a satellite airstrip located 20 miles north of the main base. The studio constructed 15 buildings on site, meticulously designed to replicate an authentic wartime airbase. The set was populated with period-correct aircraft, military vehicles, and equipment, creating an immersive environment that transported the cast and crew back to the 1940s. Another key location was needed for the film's opening and closing scenes, which depicted Major General Harvey Stovall returning to a long-abandoned English airfield. In March 1949, King and DeRussy found the perfect spot at Ozark Army Airfield in Alabama. Overgrown with waist-high weeds and eerily silent, the deserted airstrip perfectly captured the atmosphere of a forgotten wartime base. The film crew used the location to shoot hauntingly beautiful sequences, conveying the passage of time and the lingering memories of those who had served. After filming these key scenes, local farmers were hired to clear the field, so operational B-17s could take off and land for additional footage. To ensure historical accuracy, the production team paid attention to even the smallest details. Runway color was an important factor. British airfields during the war had darkened runways for camouflage, and Ozarks fit the bill perfectly. With locations secured, 20th Century Fox launched a massive logistical effort to transport the cast, crew, and equipment from Hollywood to Florida. To streamline the process, the studio chartered cargo planes to move heavy production gear. A dedicated DC-4 Skymaster was used to shuttle 72 members of the production team between bases, reducing a 5-hour drive to just 22 minutes. DeRussy played a crucial role in ensuring the authenticity of the film's uniforms and gear. He secured over $1 million worth of 1942-era Army Air Force clothing, flight suits, and equipment, ensuring that every visual detail reflected the reality of wartime service. The result was a film that not only depicted the intensity of air combat, but also honored the sacrifice and resilience of the men who had lived through it. The filming process was grueling, with Florida's intense heat proving to be an unexpected challenge. The actors were required to wear heavy flight gear to maintain realism. Thick leather jackets, fur-lined boots, and bulky parachute harnesses left them drenched in sweat between takes. DeRussy, who had never experienced filmmaking before, developed a newfound respect for the profession. Later, he admitted, "I understand why actors get paid so much. They work hard." The production schedule was relentless, with sets costing $65,000 per day to operate. Director Kane, known for his efficiency, allowed actors just one dry-run rehearsal before filming each scene. He preferred capturing performances in a single take whenever possible, keeping the energy raw and authentic. Shooting days stretched from early morning until late at night, with the production team reviewing dailies, raw footage from the day's filming, long after most had gone to bed. Despite the challenges, the passion and dedication of the entire crew resulted in one of the most realistic and emotionally gripping war films ever made. A combination of meticulous research, powerful storytelling, and visually stunning aerial sequences turned 12 O'Clock High into a cinematic masterpiece that would be studied for decades. Robert Arthur, a contract player for 20th Century Fox, took on the role of Sergeant Michael Henney, the non-commissioned officer and driver for General Frank Savage. Though a relatively minor character, Henney played a key role in grounding Savage's tough persona, offering moments of levity and human connection amid the film's intense drama. Arthur later recalled the sheer scale of the production and the effort taken to ensure authenticity. The filmmakers prioritized realism not only in storytelling, but also in visual details, enlisting hundreds of real soldiers to populate the background and add credibility to the scenes. At Eglin Air Force Base, an enormous military complex bustling with activity, the studio had the perfect location to recruit active duty personnel as extras. Many of these young airmen had no prior experience with filmmaking, but they eagerly signed up for the chance to be part of something bigger. Among them was James Story, a newly enlisted airman fresh out of basic training. While awaiting his first assignment, he was given the opportunity to work on the film. Like many others, he had no idea what the movie was about, but agreed to participate out of curiosity. For 3 weeks, Story reported to the set each morning, where he and the other extras lined up for costume fittings. The wardrobe team worked quickly, assigning uniforms based on a snap judgment of each extra's appearance rather than their actual rank. One day, Story might be dressed as a captain, the next, a private. While this inconsistency was amusing, it did little to detract from the overall authenticity of the production. As the days passed, Story became fascinated by the dedication of the Hollywood professionals around him. Gregory Peck, who portrayed the intense and demanding General Savage, was particularly impressive. He arrived on set fully prepared, never fumbling his lines, and rarely required more than 2 takes to deliver a scene perfectly. The extras, however, weren't quite as polished. One of the most grueling sequences to film was Savage's powerful introductory speech to the 918th Bombardment Group. The scene took place inside a cramped Quonset hut packed with hundreds of airmen. To add realism, the actors wore heavy flight jackets, and the set was filled with cigarette smoke to recreate the hazy atmosphere typical of wartime briefings. But after 13 takes, the conditions became unbearable. The air grew thick with heat and smoke, and the extras, drenched in sweat and coughing, struggled to maintain their composure. By the end of the shoot, many gasped for fresh air as soon as they stepped outside. Despite the overall smooth production, there were moments of real danger. Paul Wazzle, a member of the production staff, recalled a near-disastrous incident during one of the B-17 flight sequences. For a particular shot, a camera had been set up in the middle of the runway to capture a dramatic takeoff from a low angle. However, as the aircraft roared down the strip, it failed to gain enough altitude in time. One of its massive landing wheels struck the top of the camera, smashing through a box of red filters and sending shards flying through the air. A crew member, Red Crawford, had been standing alarmingly close when it happened. Though he seemed unfazed at first, the sheer shock of the incident hit him later that evening. While unwinding at the NCO club, he suddenly collapsed, his body finally processing the near tragedy he had just witnessed. Another significant challenge arose while filming the climactic belly landing sequence. Initially, the U.S. Air Force was hesitant to provide a fully operational B-17 for the stunt, worried about the risks involved. However, after extensive negotiations, they agreed to allow the use of an aircraft already loaned out for the production. The pressure was immense. There could be no second chances. The scene had to be executed perfectly on the first attempt. While active duty Air Force pilots had been flying the bombers for formation shots, they were not authorized to perform dangerous stunts. Colonel John DeRusi, who had assisted with aerial sequences and was himself an experienced pilot, was eager to take on the challenge. However, as a serving officer, he was prohibited from engaging in such risky maneuvers. Instead, the production turned to legendary stunt pilot Paul Mantz, an aviation daredevil known for his precision flying.